the Mad Master here. I'm doing another video. Hopefully it started recording before I started talking. Anyways, this is going to be a really controversial video with a very controversial subject. And as anybody knows, they've probably heard about Milo Yiannopoulos. Fucking can't even pronounce his name right. Yiannopoulos or whatever the fuck. Just a guilty admission. I used to follow him a little bit. I liked some of his arguments against radical feminism that I saw on some British talk shows. Shortly thereafter, though, I kind of lost my interest in him because he just, I don't know, he just went over the top and just said stupid shit like about his own homosexuality, like just disowning it and stuff like that. So this video or, commentary is off the cuff, so just pardon my shambling, rambling, talking, but anyways, I just decided to do this video. So as anybody that studied a little bit of history knows, there is a contingent in the gay community that does call for a certain, I guess you would maybe call it acceptance of gay relationships between teenagers and adults. So whether or not it's full on into like NAMBLA or whatever, like the figure on your left was actually a member of NAMBLA, by the way, Allen Ginsburg, who is a very famous leftist poet, writer, philosopher, whatever you want to call it, who was around in the 70s and 80s and so forth. But he was very controversial for his support of NAMBLA. Now, was his career ruined over it? No. He was still beloved by the left. And, I guess there was something that came out with George Takei about the same subject, that he was, not as opposed to this. So these are my thoughts about this. I heard the infamous Milo tape. He was on Drunken Peasants. Actually, I saw that live because I'm a follower of Amazing Atheists and Drunken Peasants, and I've been so for many years. And obviously, I think Milo has said a lot of stupid shit on the podcast, and won't even go into that. But the key thing remains. Now, is this something that does this fall into the pedophile bracket? Well, his comments about the priests and whatever about giving head or teaching them how to give head better, that was pretty tasteless and that kind of falls into the pedophile thing. Now, the general subject of whether or not relationships with teenagers and adults should be acceptable is something that's I would say is probably applicable to the straight scene as well. I think men in general are more inclined towards casual sex. It's just part of evolutionary psychology, which a lot of people don't want to admit. And this is part of the thing with homosexual sex. And now that is why, people and maybe that's partly cultural, societal, or whatever, they were on the fringe for so long. And so they kind of went to that fringe as kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of, their detractors and the people that, were full of homophobia and stuff. So I think there's another element, biological, that men are into sex, and they're drawn to younger women or younger men. And I don't mean, children, I mean pubescent adults, post-pubescent, and, maybe sometimes pubescent. Now, there was always an argument of whether or not, this is before, homosexuality became more accepted in society, whether or not, molestation had to do with, why people became gay or whatnot. So maybe there's not truth to that, but maybe there is some truth to the fact that, a lot of people's homosexual experiences are with older people. So, and that's a very controversial subject. I think that it happens more often than people want to admit. And that happens with men and women as far as gay or straight. Now, I'm not saying that, people should, I'm not saying a 12-year-old has what it takes to consent. And, I watched that Chicken Hawks documentary, which actually has Ginsburg in it, about NAMBLA. And it was pretty fucked up. Some of the, the guy that was trying to coach the kid into, or he thought, any boy that gave him interest was sexually interested in him. which is really ridiculous. And the guy was obviously very disturbed and honestly mentally ill, and it was pretty gross, you know, some of the stuff in that documentary. However, the question remains whether or not this is just part of sexuality, and it has been for millennia, or whether or not it's something that is deviant or whatever you want to call it. So I just proposed the question. I mean, you know, you have people like Ted Nugent, Jimmy Page, David Bowie, countless rock stars in the 70s that were having sex with underage girls. And a lot of them were actually pubescent rather than post-pubescent, which is, I think that would be where I draw my line as far as what is acceptable and what should be, you know, the age of consent. I think the age of consent should be 16, but, you know, you should allow for things like a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old. If they have sex, you shouldn't arrest the 17-year-old. You shouldn't, you know, throw them in prison for, you know, or put them on a sex offender list or whatever. But, you know, the question remains whether or not that should be acceptable or not. And I think, you know, Milo's whole thing was just questioning some of that, and with some added gross out humor, pedophile or whatever. He's a provocateur. He's, you know, he's obviously not in, he's kind of in deep shit right now with all the comments that were years old, by the way. And, you know, it's a question whether or not the homosexual community is, you know, has this as part of their thing or not. And I don't mean NAMBLA, and I don't mean like 13-year-olds or 12-year-olds, but just in general, whether or not that's part of the whole thing. And, you know, you can question, consent is very complicated thing. And one of the better points that Milo had during that conversation was the fact that he went into that. Now, I think he ruined it because he made the joke about the priest or whatever, but it was very relevant to the conversation. So that's all I'm trying to say. I think he's a kind of a repulsive guy. And, you know, in some ways, Ginsburg was pretty, you know, repulsive in his support of NAMBLA. And not just, you know, it's one thing to say, oh, you think the age of consent should be lower than what it is, or sometimes there's some exceptions to the rule and stuff. But to support an organization that actually proposed, you know, these relationships probably a little bit beyond, you know, a 15-year-old that was, you know, fully developed, or 16-year-old, you know, boy, and actually go a little bit younger than that. And a lot of times they did, and members did. That's pushing the line. So I think we need to ask these questions. We need to go into these sociological, psychological, biological, evolutionary ideas and try to delve into what is exactly making them tick. Instead of just, you know, instead of just whitewashing everything and just saying, oh, it's just terrible. It's unacceptable, you know, to talk about these things. We need to talk about them. We need to have a real conversation about this stuff. And, you know, this video is pretty, I know this is a very controversial subject. I realize I've done some videos about this before, but, you know, I still think that we need to talk about this. And Milo isn't the best person to bring it up, honestly, because he, you know, it's hard to tell when he's serious or not, but we do need to have the conversation, period. And as we evolve as a society, we need to talk about these things, like consent as well, you know, just in general. So that's all I got to say. Please subscribe. Hope you like this video. I'll do more, and you'll be seeing a lot more from me in the future.